All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got a classic David versus Goliath story for you, and it's all about the incredibly high-stakes game of intellectual property strategy. So that's a direct quote from a biography of Henry Ford, and it really sets the stage. I mean, this was the core philosophy of the company's founder. He didn't see patents as a way to protect inventors. Nope. He saw them as these annoying fences that just got in the way of progress. And that kind of thinking, that patents are there to stifle innovation, not encourage it, well, it got baked right into the company's DNA. And that right there is what sets the stage for the massive conflict we're about to dive into. So, what does happen? What happens when one guy, a single inventor with a truly brilliant idea, finds himself standing in the way of a corporate giant that thinks just like that? Well, let's find out. Let me introduce you to our inventor, a man named Robert Kearns.
Okay, so let's talk about the idea itself, because it was pretty revolutionary. Back in the early 1960s, our engineer, Robert Kearns, was getting really annoyed by a simple everyday problem that you've probably experienced too.
Think about it. Before Kearns, your windshield wipers basically had two settings, on and off, right? So in a light drizzle, you'd have this constant, irritating swish, swish that was just as distracting as the rain itself. Kearns thought there has to be a better way. He envisioned something smarter, a system that could actually adapt to how hard it was raining. And believe it or not, the inspiration for this huge breakthrough, it came from a really personal and, frankly, kind of weird place.
Yeah, so get this. It all started with a bizarre accident involving a champagne cork on his wedding night. The injury left his eyes super sensitive, and that constant swish of the wipers drove him crazy. And that's when he had his aha moment. He decided to model his invention on the human eyelid. You know, how it blinks intermittently. It was such an elegant solution. So he tinkered in his basement, built a prototype, proved it worked on his own car, and then he knew exactly which company he had to show it to.
And so, the inventor meets the giant. You have to understand, Kearns was a lifelong fan of the Ford Motor Company. He really admired them. So he approached them with his invention, totally hoping to partner up with this automotive titan he looked up to.
And Ford's engineers, they were impressed. They really were. But they threw down a monumental challenge. They told him, look, this device has to run for, get this, 3 million cycles without a single failure. And this wasn't just some random number they pulled out of a hat. No, this was their absolute, non-negotiable standard for any safety-related part on their cars. They needed to know if his basement invention was actually tough enough for the real world.
So what does Kearns do? He goes home, builds this crazy test rig in an aquarium, and submerges his device in this gritty, nasty slurry of oil and sawdust to simulate the worst conditions imaginable. And he just let it run. For months. And guess what? It didn't just meet Ford's standard. It absolutely crushed it. He'd proven his concept was tough as nails. So, okay, now he has a proven technology. It's time to talk strategy. All right, let's look at the entrepreneur's IP strategy here. Because once he proved the tech worked, Kearns had two big questions to answer. One, how do I protect this thing? And two, how do I actually make money from it? And this is where we really see the two core pillars of any intellectual property strategy.
So that first pillar brings us to a really key concept in IP strategy. It's called appropriability. It sounds complicated, but it's not. All it means is, how do you build a fence around your idea? How do you make sure that you're the one who gets to capture the profits from it, and not just any competitor who comes along?
For Kearns, the answer was pretty straightforward: the legal system. He went out and filed multiple patents for his technology. These patents were his legal shield. They were a formal public declaration saying, hey, world, this idea, it's mine. But, and this is a huge but we're about to get into, owning an idea on a piece of paper isn't always the whole story.
Okay, so that brings us to the second pillar, commercialization. You've protected your idea. Now what? How do you actually turn it into a business? Are you going to license it out to someone else? Just sell the patent outright? Or are you going to try to build something much bigger?
And Kearns, he didn't want to just take a check for licensing his idea. No way. He had a much bigger vision. He wanted to build his own manufacturing business around his invention. He wanted to become a direct supplier to the entire auto industry. That was his commercialization plan. The only problem? Ford. Well, they had a very different playbook.
So now, let's flip the script and look at the corporation's IP playbook. See, Ford's strategy didn't just come out of nowhere. It was shaped by decades of a very specific corporate culture, one that went all the way back to Henry Ford himself.
Remember that quote from the beginning about hating patents? Well, that philosophy was baked right into Ford's strategy. Their goal, above all else, was control, total self-sufficiency. It's a business concept called vertical integration. Basically, they wanted to understand any new technology and then bring it in-house so they could produce it themselves. The idea of relying on a small, single-source supplier like Robert Kearns? To them, that was a massive strategic risk they just were not willing to take. And you can see it, right? This put them on a direct collision course with Kearns' plan.
And this was the critical moment, the turning point. Before they'd sign any deal, Ford insisted they needed to know the exact inner workings of his invention. They framed it as a safety issue. This is a safety device, we have to know how it works. And Kearns, trusting the very company he'd admired his whole life, agreed. He handed over the keys to the kingdom. He showed them everything.
And here's where it all comes to a head when strategies collide. You've got two completely opposing game plans. On one side, the entrepreneur. Patent the idea, then build a business around manufacturing it. On the other side, the corporation. Learn the technology, then build it yourself to maintain control. And with this one groundbreaking invention stuck right in the middle, well, a collision was absolutely inevitable.
So, just 6 years after Kearns first showed them as prototype, Ford rolls out its own cars with, you guessed it, an electronic intermittent wiper. For years, Kearns kept trying to work out a deal. He was still hoping for that partnership. But by 1978, the writing was on the wall. It was obvious Ford had zero intention of working with him. So, he sued. But this wasn't the start of some quick resolution. It was the beginning of a grueling, decade-long legal war. And the legal battle just immediately bogged down into this war of procedure. For instance, Kearns' lawyers would have to file something called a motion to compel. It's basically a formal demand forcing Ford to hand over internal documents that they were trying to hide. Every single step like this was its own little battle. Then you have things like interrogatories. These are just these huge, long lists of written questions that each side sends to the other, and they have to be answered under oath. Both legal teams use these tactics not just to dig for information, but to drag the whole process out, burying the actual invention under literal mountains of paperwork. On top of that, a lot of the key information, like Ford's internal R&D files, was designated as sealed matter. That means it was all confidential, locked away. The whole fight just became this endless blizzard of motions, objections, and depositions. For a single inventor going up against a massive corporate legal department, it was a war of attrition. It was designed to completely exhaust him and his resources. 12. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many years the initial legal battle lasted. 12 years! From the day he filed the lawsuit to the day it finally ended. It is just a staggering amount of time, and it really shows you the immense cost and complexity of trying to defend your idea even when you've done everything right and gotten a patent. And all of this leaves us with a really critical question, doesn't it? For an inventor, is a patent really a shield, or is it just the key that unlocks a much, much bigger fight? The story of Robert Kearns is such a powerful lesson. It proves that an effective IP strategy isn't just about getting a patent to protect your idea. It's about deeply understanding the strategy, the culture, and the motivations of the other players on the field. A patent is an absolutely critical tool, for sure, but as Robert Kearns found out the hard way, it is not a guarantee. Sometimes it's just the beginning of the battle.